I'm John Fensterwald.
And I'm Kathy Barron. Together we write and edit toped.org, a forum on California education policy.
Join us while we interview interesting and important leaders in education. You'll learn a lot in 10 minutes or less. I'm John Fensterwald, and I'm pleased to have with me today Michael Horn. Michael is the co-director and executive director for education of the Innosight Institute in Mountain View. It's a nonprofit think tank focused on education and innovation. He's also the co-author with Harvard Professor Clayton Christensen of the 2008 bestseller, Disrupting Class: How Disruptive Innovation Will Change the Way the World Learns. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
So today I thought we'd talk about online education and technology innovations that will, as you say, disrupt and potentially transform education schools in California. So perhaps we can start with your prediction that 50% of all high school courses will be taken online in less than a decade. So let's talk about what they may look like and how that will benefit students and shake up the system.
Yeah, well, so first to the prediction, it's obviously a bold one, I think, that caught a lot of people's eyes when we came out with it. And I think a lot of people thought we were crazy at first and then said, these guys actually were too conservative on their projection. It's growing really fast. And I think the reality is it's going to look like a lot of different things. There will be some students for whom staying at home and working online with a teacher online will make sense. I think the majority of students, however, will be engaged in what we're calling blended learning, where they're really learning online with control over the pace, the path, the time, the place of their learning, but they'll be doing it in brick-and-mortar schools with teachers on site who have many different roles from what they do today. And the hope, but the big question mark, is that it could really create a student-centric education system where each child can learn at the pace and the path that makes sense for them, because every one of us learns differently. We've just never been able to customize an education for our different needs, and the hope is with technology we can break that trade-off and make it work.
So walk through that a little bit. So what does that entail in terms of the way students learn, the way teachers teach? It seems like it's a major shift in a lot of different things.
Well, there are some big shifts, and it's why there's some big question marks, I think, about how it will ultimately unfold. From the student's perspective, it's funny, we've always learned at different paces. Some people grab onto material really quickly, some people struggle with it, and they don't quite get it at the same pace as their neighbor. But then at some point it snaps in place and they can accelerate. The problem is the school system has always standardized the way it teaches and tests. So you're in the middle of a 3-week unit in geometry. At the end of the 3-week unit, you all move on to the next unit regardless of whether you've mastered everything. That creates further holes in your learning and so forth. What's interesting about technology in online learning is that I can learn at the pace that makes sense for me, and I'll only move on when I've truly mastered the concept. And maybe I'll have a module that allows me to play a game and learn the math that way. Maybe then I'll do some directed practice. Maybe I'll do a project. But I'll have these different options open so that I can learn in the way that makes sense for me and move on once I truly understand it. Now, you asked about teachers too. It's obviously a very different job for them, because no longer will they be at the front of the room lecturing to a group of 30 students with a one-size-fits-none lesson plan. Instead, I don't think fully everyone knows what this will look like, but my hypothesis is that there may be 3 different roles for teachers in the future. They're going to be really important, but a group of them will be the mentors and motivators and facilitators of learning. A group of them will be content experts who can answer those content-heavy questions. And a group of them will probably be caseworkers who help to fill in with the non-academic problems that have always held some kids back, but teachers have never had time to address those problems.
So it's not necessarily a threat to teachers' jobs per se, as much as doing things differently in specialization?
Yeah, we actually think it'll be really liberating to teachers. The teachers who today are teaching in online and blended learning environments report they're way more satisfied with their jobs, and that they get to know their students far better, because now their job entails working one-on-one and in small groups, as opposed to the massive group of students they had to deal with before.
So where does California stand in the world of online education?
Yeah, unfortunately not very good. California, according to a recent effort that came out of this thing called Digital Learning Now, California actually ranks dead last among all of the states in its online learning practice and policies. And the reason for it really is that there just haven't been policies that allow dollars to follow students down to their course level of choice for online learning. There's a lot of antiquated policies about how you classify online and blended learning. And it's just created some really uncomfortable policy trade-offs that haven't made sense for practitioners on the ground to create these environments.
So before we should talk about what California needs to do to change those barriers. There have been some studies, and I think in Minnesota and Pennsylvania, comparing just a strictly virtual courses as opposed to blended learning, that found that students did not actually perform as well as in traditional brick and mortar. So before, what are the issues that California needs to deal with before it just turns it open to this great wide world of Great West?
It's a great question because it's a huge problem right now.
Yeah.
So studies on average have shown that online learning on average works better, and blend is the best of both worlds. The challenge with that, though, is just because something is online does not make it good. And the policies in a lot of states that we've seen start to do full-time virtual schooling haven't worried too much about student outcomes.
Yeah.
And so they've basically funded these schools once you had the student enroll in the school on October or September or whatever their count day might be, give all the funds, and then be totally unconcerned with what happened next. Well, so a lot of these providers would take the money, and sometimes the students would leave afterwards and go back to the districts. There wouldn't be any dollars to fund them, but hey, such is life. And so the incentives were totally perverse in a lot of these states. So I think California, as it starts to walk into this, we have full-time virtual schools today here and so forth, has to adopt a very strong mindset that we're going to be very concerned with student outcomes, shut down schools that do not do a good job of serving students, and be very free with what the schools look like, though, because the whole idea is that students don't fit in a box. So we ought to have creative arrangements for educators to come up with different ways to serve different kids.
Well, some schools, I think it's Florida, is it, that actually the provider gets paid if the student shows as actually proficiency in that subject, right?
That's exactly right, and to me that'd be my number one policy recommendation to anyone, which is because in online learning time is variable, you can hold the learning constant. So maybe it takes you 3 months to pass the course, maybe it takes you 4, but we can demonstrate that you've actually passed it and hold some piece of the funding until you've actually done that. And so in Florida, the Florida Virtual School only gets paid 90% of the funds when a student successfully completes. Utah recently passed a bill that I think is a very smart one, far-reaching last year, where providers will only get 50% of funding upon student successful completion. So somewhere in that neighborhood is probably the right place to be.
So we have rocket ship education in San Jose, which is blended and is seen as a model. What are the barriers in California if rocket ship's doing it? Why can't every school do it?
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting actually is that rocket ship has, I think, opened up a lot of people's eyes to that we can do a lot more in California than we thought was possible. The policies seem to restrict a lot of these things. And all of a sudden you've got rocket ship, KIPP schools in LA launched KIPP Empower last year, blended learning model, doing really interesting things. Aspire Charter Schools is looking at this now. Summit in the Bay Area has launched some blended learning models. Los Altos Public Schools, a school district, has launched a blended learning math. Yeah, so
are there other districts doing this?
Riverside has done some stuff. So we have some examples of districts. There are more charters, but the reality is because funding is so crunched in California, people are realizing blended learning is a way to not only personalize learning, but actually do it more affordably. And so a lot of people are running to this as a result. The challenge becomes it's not a perfect fit. So in Los Altos, for example, the 5th grade students were doing their math, and you say, well, does it work? It's kind of hard to tell because they still took the 5th grade math test at the end of the year, and yet students in the class were doing trigonometry and algebra and calculus. So we don't pick that up.
So who should our viewers look at if they want to find out more about online learning? A state, give us a where to go to find out more.
Yeah, so the best states, I think Utah right now is in the lead.
Okay.
I think Utah's got the best policy set. It's focused on student outcomes.
Okay.
And
Good, thanks.
Florida would be my next.
Good. Well, Michael, thank you for joining us today, and we'll have you back sometime in a year and find out where we are a year from now.
Thank you.
John Fensterwald, educated guest, toped.org. Thanks for watching.